It was nearly midnight when I stepped off the late bus from my shift at the bookstore, the cold October wind biting at my cheeks as I wrapped my scarf tighter around my neck and trudged down the familiar sidewalk that led to my house, or what I still believed was my house at the time. The neighborhood was quiet, save for the occasional barking of a dog or the distant hum of a car. And I remember feeling the kind of tiredness that doesn't just sit in your bones, but in your soul. My back ached from lifting heavy boxes all evening, my eyes burned from staring at inventory logs, and my legs wanted nothing more than to collapse into bed. But as I turned the corner onto our street and glanced at the house that had been my home since I was 10, a strange emptiness hit me. The porch light, which was always on when someone was expecting me, was off. All the windows were dark, curtains drawn tight. I tried not to overthink it. Maybe they just forgot. Maybe everyone went to sleep early, but as I stepped onto the porch and fished my keys from my backpack, the first real wave of unease hit me. I inserted the key into the front door lock, the same key I had used for nearly a decade, and twisted. Nothing happened. Confused, I jiggled it, tried again, then pulled it out to inspect it. Same key, same lock. I tried again harder. Now, still nothing. My brows furrowed as my heart started to race. I stepped back, glanced around, and tried to steady my breath. Then my phone buzzed. I pulled it from my coat pocket, expecting maybe a message from my mom about a new lock or some emergency. Instead, I froze. The screen lit up with a single text message from my mother. "Don't bother knocking. This isn't your home anymore." Just those words. No explanation, no apology, no context. I stood there for a full minute in complete disbelief, rereading it over and over again like my brain couldn't fully absorb the betrayal. I hit the call button, my fingers numb from cold and shock. But the phone rang once and then cut to a robotic message. "You have been blocked by this number." I stood on the porch, dumbfounded, too stunned to cry, too cold to think straight. My mom had locked me out, without warning, without discussion, without mercy. And somehow, in all of that, I knew deep down it had nothing to do with me forgetting to take the trash out or being late with the utility bill I always paid for. No, this had been building. I sat down on the cold concrete steps, hugging my knees, shivering not just from the weather, but from the realization that I had nowhere to go, not tonight, not now. I wasn't just locked out of the house, I had been cast out of my family. The longer I sat there, staring out at the streetlight that flickered like a dying heartbeat, the more the past few weeks started to rewind in my mind like a cruel movie reel. It started with the wedding. My younger sister, Chloe, was getting married, and my parents were treating it like the second coming of royalty. She was the golden child, always had been. It's the kind who got away with slamming doors, skipping class, running up credit cards, and still being treated like a princess. I, on the other hand, was the practical one, the invisible one. The one who cleaned up after Chloe's tantrums and helped Mom cook holiday dinners without being asked. I never got into trouble, not because I was afraid of punishment, but because I didn't want to make anyone's life harder. That's how I was raised, to serve, to accommodate, to stay quiet. So when Chloe got engaged to a man she met on a cruise 6 months earlier, my parents decided to pour every dime they had and then cement to making her wedding look like something out of a magazine, and they expected me to help. No, not help. As in, show up for cake tasting or offer suggestions on bridesmaid dresses. Help as in, drop out of college to work full-time so you can contribute financially. I thought they were joking. They weren't. They sat me down in the living room one Sunday afternoon like they were giving me an intervention. Mom, in her tone of calm authority, said Chloe deserves a perfect wedding, and we all have to make sacrifices. Dad nodded solemnly, adding, "We've done a lot for you, and now it's your turn to give back." I looked at them, stunned. I'm 2 semesters from graduating. I've worked 2 jobs to pay my tuition without asking you for a cent, and now you want me to give that up so Chloe can have a designer dress and a 5-tier cake? Chloe, who had the nerve to be sitting across from me scrolling through her phone during this conversation, finally looked up and smirked. "Don't be so dramatic. You can go back to school later." I laughed, actually laughed. A bitter, stunned kind of sound that didn't feel like it belonged to me. I said no, firmly. For once, I put my foot down, and that was the beginning of the unraveling after that. The shift in the household was subtle at first. Cold shoulders at dinner. Doors closed a little louder, passive-aggressive comments about loyalty and family unity. Mom stopped packing leftovers for my work shifts. Dad stopped making small talk. Chloe made sure to blast her wedding playlists at top volume while I studied. Then came the real venom. A week before I was locked out, I overheard Chloe telling Mom in the kitchen that I didn't care about this family, and that maybe it was time she moved out if she thought she was too good for us. I remember Mom saying quietly, "Maybe you're right." I brushed it off, thinking surely they wouldn't actually go through with it. But here I was, cold, hungry, locked out, and completely alone. The hours passed like sludge. I curled up on the porch in a tight ball, trying to retain warmth. A neighbor's porch light flicked on across the street, and I briefly considered walking over and asking for help. But shame kept me planted. What would I even say? "Hi, I'm the daughter they just disowned. Can I use your bathroom?" I waited until the first traces of dawn crept into the sky before I finally stood up. Okay. Knees stiff and heart heavier than it had ever been. I walked to the corner cafe that opened at 6, scraped together the last few dollars in my pocket for a black coffee, and called my friend Leela from the bathroom stall, my voice cracking as I whispered, "Can I crash at your place for a few days?" She didn't hesitate. "Of course, come now." Leela lived in a small apartment above her dad's auto shop, a cluttered but warm place that smelled of cinnamon and engine oil. She handed me a blanket and a cup of hot tea, and I sat on her worn couch, finally letting the tears fall. All of it, everything I had been holding in, poured out in jagged breaths. Leela didn't ask questions, just rubbed my back and let me fall apart. For the next few days, I functioned like a ghost. I still went to class, still worked my shifts, but I moved like someone in a daze. Every time I saw a mother and daughter sharing a table at the cafe or a bride-to-be gushing with friends, it felt like someone was jabbing a needle into my ribs. I didn't just lose a roof, I had lost my sense of belonging. But the worst part, I still kept hoping it was a mistake. Maybe my mom would call and say, "It went too far. Come home." But silence stretched. Then came the rumors. Chloe had apparently been telling anyone who would listen that I had a mental episode and had to be removed from the house, that I stole money from Mom's purse, that I screamed and broke dishes. All lies. The kind of lies that make you realize someone has been planning your erasure for a while. I ran into an old high school friend at the grocery store who looked at me with wide eyes and asked, "Are you okay? I heard you were, hospitalized or something." My jaw clenched. I smiled and said I was fine, but inside something snapped. I was done playing the quiet one, done being polite, done protecting people who never protected me. And then, one afternoon as I was closing up the bookstore, a man in a suit walked in, holding a large envelope. "Are you Miss Elaine Morris?" he asked. My stomach twisted. I nodded. He handed me the envelope. "You've been served." My heart dropped. I waited until he left to open it. Inside was a letterhead from a local law office, Briggs and Caldwell. But this wasn't a lawsuit. It wasn't an eviction notice. It was a letter stating that my name was still legally on the deed of the house, something I had long forgotten about. When my grandmother passed away years ago, she had quietly added me as a co-owner to the house, wanting to ensure I'd always have a place to live. She never told anyone, not even my parents. The lawyer, Mr. Caldwell, wanted to speak with me about my rights. My knees went weak. For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark, not anger, but justice. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't over. Maybe I wasn't powerless. Maybe the girl they tried to erase still had a voice. I clutched the envelope to my chest and walked out of the bookstore that night with my chin a little higher, my shoulders a little straighter, and a plan slowly forming in the shadows of my mind. Living on Leela's couch wasn't ideal, but at least it was warm and safe. And those were luxuries I didn't take for granted anymore. Every night when I curled up under the borrowed fleece blanket, tried to focus on the roof above my head rather than the hole that had been torn open in my chest. Layla did her best to lift my spirits, always leaving out tea for me in the mornings, always insisting I take the last slice of pizza or the softer pillow, and always reminding me that what my mother had done was not my fault, but even kindness couldn't fully shield me from the whispers that had begun circling like vultures in our small town. At first, I brushed them off, thinking maybe it was just the natural curiosity that came with a sudden absence. After all, I had gone from living in the same house for over a decade to disappearing overnight, and people were bound to notice. But soon it became clear that this wasn't curiosity, it was a smear campaign. A woman I barely knew from church pulled me aside one day with a sad smile and whispered, "We're praying for your recovery, sweetie," which confused me until another woman at the cafe asked if it was true I had stolen from my parents and been taken to the hospital for evaluation. Each time, it felt like I was being doused in cold water, like someone was chiseling away at what little reputation I had left in this town, sculpting a version of me that didn't exist. I knew it was Chloe. Who else could it be? Who else had the venom and the access to rewrite my story before I even had a chance to tell it myself? She had always been theatrical, always a liar when it suited her, but this was calculated. Every rumor, every look of pity or suspicion was a small blade she had carefully honed. And I was the target, bleeding from 1,000 tiny cuts. I tried to keep my head down, focus on school, work, and survival. But the exhaustion was relentless. I worked as shifts at the bookstore and took night classes, which meant I barely had time to breathe, let alone think about the future. Still, in the quiet moments, usually when I was alone in the back room, scanning inventory or restocking the mystery novels, I thought about the letter, the one Mr. Caldwell had sent me. I had tucked it into my backpack like a talisman, rereading it in the break room, on the bus, under the covers, at night. My name was on the deed. My grandmother, the only person in my family who had ever made me feel seen and valued, had quietly added me before she passed, protecting me from the grave in a way my living relatives never would. At first, I didn't know what to do with that information. The idea of marching into a lawyer's office and asserting ownership felt absurd. I had no money, no legal knowledge, and I still couldn't fully process the betrayal of being tossed out like a stranger. But after the third time someone asked me if I was getting the help I needed, I decided I couldn't keep waiting for someone else to save me. I called the number on the letter and scheduled a meeting with Mr. Caldwell for the following Tuesday. I didn't tell anyone, not even Layla. I needed to do this on my own, the day of the meeting. I wore my best outfit, black slacks, and a navy blue blouse I had ironed the night before, and pulled my hair into a neat bun, trying to present the version of myself that I knew existed, the version Chloe was working so hard to erase. Mr. Caldwell's office was in a brick building downtown, nestled between a florist and a tax service. I walked in with my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth, clutching my bag like it was armor. The receptionist greeted me kindly and led me to a private office where a tall, silver-haired man in a gray suit stood to shake my hand. "Miss Maurice," he said, "I'm glad you came." I sat down across from him, legs trembling under the table, and tried to steady my breathing as he pulled out a thick folder and began to speak. For the next 2 hours, I learned more about my family and my legal rights than I had in a lifetime of living under their roof. My grandmother had amended the deed to the house 5 years ago, shortly after her cancer diagnosis, naming both my mother and me as co-owners. She had apparently been concerned about how my parents treated me, and Although she never directly accused them of anything, her actions spoke volumes. She wanted to make sure you'd always have a place to live, Mr. Caldwell said, his voice calm but firm. Legally, they had no right to remove you from the property without your consent or a court order. What they did could qualify as unlawful eviction and, potentially even fraud, depending on how they handled the utilities and documents. I sat in stunned silence, absorbing each word like it was a lifeline. But he added, we have to be careful. If you want to take action, you need to be ready. It won't be easy. And no, it won't be clean. I met his eyes and said, with more conviction than I expected, I want to fight. What followed was a crash course in legal strategy. Mr. Caldwell walked me through my options, filing a civil suit, requesting a formal mediation, even petitioning the court to remove my parents from the house if they were deemed abusive coners. It was overwhelming, terrifying, and oddly empowering. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had a voice. That night, I returned to Leela's apartment, my mind buzzing with possibility. I didn't tell her everything, just that I had a plan now. She hugged me and said she was proud of me. And I realized I hadn't heard those words in years. Over the next few days, I gathered what I needed: copies of documents, text messages, witnesses who could attest to my sudden removal. Mr. Caldwell filed a cease and desist letter, which was delivered to my parents' house by a process server. I wasn't there to see it, but I heard from a neighbor that my mother looked like she'd seen a ghost when she opened the door. The silence that followed was deafening. No angry texts, no threats, nothing. Until a week later, when my mother showed up at the bookstore. It was a slow afternoon, and I was behind the counter updating the register when I saw her reflection in the glass. I turned, and there she was, standing at the entrance like a queen surveying her kingdom. Wearing a beige trench coat and holding her purse with both hands like a weapon. I braced myself. "Elaine," she said, her voice cool and precise. "Beep. Need to talk." I gestured toward the door. "Not here." She raised an eyebrow. "Then where?" I gave her the address of a nearby diner and told her I'd meet her in 15 minutes. When I arrived, she was already sitting in a booth, sipping water and looking like she was ready for a negotiation. I sat across from her, arms crossed. "I got your little letter," she said, her tone laced with disdain. "So now you think you can threaten us? Sue your own family?" I said nothing, just waited. She leaned in, eyes narrowing. "You've always been so ungrateful. We gave you everything." I couldn't help it, I laughed. Not a joyful laugh, but the kind that came from disbelief. "You gave me chores. You gave me judgment. You gave me exile." She flinched, then recovered. "We did what was best. Chloe needed us. You were becoming difficult." I stared at her, stunned by her ability to rewrite history. "You locked me out. No warning, no conversation, just a text." She shrugged. "You made your choice." "No," I said. "My voice. Steady. You made it for me. And now I'm making mine." She stiffened. "What do you want?" I leaned forward. "The truth? And what's mine?" She scoffed. "Fine, take your little lawsuit, but don't expect this family to forgive you." I stood. "I stopped needing your forgiveness the night you locked the door." The days that followed were a blur of paperwork, meetings, and strategizing. Mr. Caldwell was tireless, treating my case not just as business, but as a mission. He told me he knew my grandmother well, that she had often spoken about me with pride. That gave me strength, eh? Meanwhile, Chloe began her counteroffensive. She posted cryptic messages online about snakes in the family and how money changes people. She sent friends to snoop on me at work. One even tried to record me, but I didn't bite. I didn't post back. I didn't fight fire with fire. I stayed silent. Let them talk. Let them unravel. The more they tried to vilify me, the more they revealed their own cruelty. I began to feel powerful in my quiet. I wasn't just the forgotten daughter anymore. I was a woman rebuilding from ashes. And the world was starting to notice, I began. documenting everything, every expense, every memory. Every text that showed how I was treated over the years. Mr. Caldwell said a court might not care about feelings. But patterns mattered. Abuse wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was 1,000 little omissions, a lifetime of being told you didn't matter. And now, for the first time, my story will be told. One night, while sorting through old files, I found a birthday card from my grandmother. Inside was a handwritten note. "You are more than what they see. One day, you'll know that for yourself." I clutched it to my chest and wept. Not because I was sad, but because she had known. She had seen this coming. And she had prepared me for it. I didn't know what the future held. The court date was still weeks away, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I had truth on my side. I had allies. And most of all, I had reclaimed my voice. This wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about dignity. It's about rewriting the narrative Chloe had tried to steal. About telling every girl who'd ever been silenced that she could stand up even when her legs were shaking. I looked in the mirror that night, truly looked, and whispered, "You're not invisible." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined, more clinical than dramatic. The beige walls and polished wooden tables, a stark contrast to the emotional weight I carried with me as I walked through its doors. I sat beside Mr. Caldwell at the plaintiff's table, dressed in a simple navy suit I borrowed from Leela's cousin, clutching a slim folder filled with printed emails, photographs, affidavits, and annotated deeds the armor I had pieced together over weeks of quiet but determined war. Across the aisle, my mother sat with her jaw tight and arms crossed, wearing her best pearls and a black blazer as if she were attending a funeral instead of a hearing. Chloe sat beside her, dressed head to toe in white, her signature smirk twisted into something colder-like. She had just swallowed a bitter pill and was still deciding who to blame. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes and no patience for theatrics, began by reviewing the case summary. Mr. Caldwell stood calm and composed and laid out our argument with precision, that I, as a legal owner of the home, had been forcefully and unlawfully locked out of the property. That I had been the target of a malicious campaign to defame and discredit me. And that my basic rights had been violated in the name of family control, disguised as concern. The defense tried to spin it. My mother claimed I had left voluntarily, that I had stormed out during a disagreement and refused to come back, and that the locks were changed only for safety. Chloe added fuel to the lie, declaring I had violent tendencies and had made everyone feel unsafe. I stared at them, not blinking as they spoke, marveling at how easily they wove fictions from thin air. But then Mr. Caldwell presented our evidence. Text messages from my mother. "Don't bother knocking. This isn't your home anymore," printed and time-stamped. Testimonies from neighbors who saw me locked out. Bank records showing that I was still contributing financially to the household expenses even after being removed. The updated deed with my name clearly listed. And, perhaps most damning of all, the letter from my grandmother written to Mr. Caldwell shortly before her death, requesting that I be added to the deed because, as she said in her words, "I worry they will turn on her one day, and I want her protected." The room went still when that letter was read aloud. My mother's face crumpled slightly, her mask faltering. Chloe looked like she had been slapped. The judge raised an eyebrow, made a few notes. It asked a handful of questions, most of which the defense dodged awkwardly or answered with forced smiles. And then it was my turn to speak. I stood slowly, every nerve in my body buzzing. But when I opened my mouth, I found my voice was clear. I told the truth. I didn't embellish or attack. I didn't cry or scream. I simply recounted what had happened. I described the night I came home to find myself locked out, the cold steps I sat on until dawn, the cafe where I had to buy a coffee just to use the bathroom. I spoke of the rumors, the lies, the smear campaign. I told the judge how I had supported myself through college, how I had never asked for much, just a place to belong. I told her about my grandmother, the only person in that family who had ever treated me like I mattered, and how her quiet decision had given me the strength to fight. When I finished, the silence in the room was thick, almost reverent. The judge looked at me with something that might have been sympathy, or perhaps admiration, and then she turned to my mother and said, "Do you have anything to say?" My mother opened her mouth, closed it, and finally said she was always so distant. We didn't know how to reach her. It was the closest thing to an admission I'd ever get. In the end, the judgment was swift. The judge ruled in my favor. She confirmed my legal co-ownership and declared that my removal from the property had been unlawful. She granted me a restraining order against Chloe, citing emotional harassment, and ordered my parents to reimburse me for the rent I had paid while wrongfully displaced. But perhaps the most poetic part came afterward when the judge asked me what I wanted to do next. Mr. Caldwell and I had discussed it in advance. I could have requested to reclaim half the house, force them to buy me out, or even petition to have them removed for violating the co-ownership agreement. But I didn't want the house anymore. That house was no longer a home. It was a graveyard of expectations, a monument to everything they'd refused to see in me. So I sold my share. A local investor bought it, cash. My name was signed off, and I walked away with enough money to buy my own small apartment near campus. The first time I unlocked the door to that new place, keys jangling in my shaking hand, I stood in the center of the empty living room and let out a long, trembling breath. This was mine, not given, not borrowed. Mine. I spent the following weeks making that apartment into a sanctuary. I painted the walls soft, calming colors, bought furniture piece by piece, each item chosen with care. A second-hand bookshelf, thrifted couch, a lamp shaped like a tree that reminded me of the forest behind Grandma's house. I framed photos of places I loved, quotes that reminded me to stay strong, and a copy of my grandmother's letter, which I hung beside my bed. Every corner of that apartment held meaning, held proof that I was rebuilding not out of spite, but out of self-worth. I still worked at the bookstore. I still attended class. But people started seeing me differently. Some apologized for believing Chloe's lies. Others just kept their distance, unsure of what to say. Didn't matter. I wasn't doing this for them. My mother tried to reach out once. She sent a short email that simply said, "I hope you're happy. You broke this family." I didn't reply, not out of anger, but because I had nothing left to say. Chloe was quieter online now. Her posts are less venomous, more performative. Last I heard, her wedding had been postponed indefinitely. Maybe the chaos had caught up with her. Maybe karma had. I didn't wish her pain, but I also didn't wish her peace that she had tried to steal from me. As for my father, he never said a word. Not during court, not afterward. His silence was perhaps the most honest thing he'd ever given me. Months passed, seasons changed. I graduated college with honors. Mr. Caldwell attended the ceremony, standing in the back and clapping like a proud uncle. Leela cried and brought flowers. I looked out into the audience and didn't search for my parents. I knew they wouldn't be there, and that was okay. Some losses are necessary. Some absences are blessings. After the ceremony, I went back to my apartment, placed my diploma on the wall, and sat quietly with a cup of tea. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who begged for scraps of affection, who tolerated cold shoulders and cruel words because she didn't know better. And I thought about the woman I had become, the one who stood in court and reclaimed her voice, who built a life not from bitterness, but from courage. My story didn't end in that courtroom. It began there. Over time, I began volunteering at Quincy Kappa. And we all know I've been exploring. With so read yours. And we all know I've been exploring that path. We have down to Kapari Casto with Quinch Kappa, my cas code. My Quinch commits, my Quinch code, my space, my cas in the app. Every quinch comed with quinch kapod, so we got quinch kami to see so regate to accord with quin kake out to queen ka with quinch kakui like us sunny to see we I can you to again we to see with you to you guided I could I did it cat I did the kike with what I that I do you to I for the kick with you got I could you cat or a women's center, helping others navigate housing disputes and emotional abuse. I shared my story when asked, not as a victim, but as a survivor. I became someone others could lean on, not because I had all the answers, but because I knew what it was like to feel forgotten. And that knowledge became power. My past didn't define me. It refined me. Sometimes I still walk past the old neighborhood. The house looks the same, but it feels different. The porch I once slept on now holds flower pots and a rocking chair, but the air around it is heavy with memory. I won't stop. I don't stare. I just nod once to the ghost of who I used to be and keep walking, because I have a new home now, a new life, a new truth. And when people ask me how I did it, how I stood up after being knocked down so brutally by the very people who were supposed to love me most, I tell them this: sometimes the greatest revenge isn't fire or fury. Sometimes it's peaceful. Sometimes it's becoming everything they said you'd never be. And sometimes it's the silence, the quiet dignity of knowing who you are that echoes loudest of all.